Book TV recently went to Capitol Hill to find out what books are on the reading lists of members of Congress.
Congressman Bill Johnson, representing Ohio's 6th District. What are you reading?
Oh my goodness, that's almost, it's too big to say, because I'm in the process of 5 different books. I've pretty much finished one of them, the latest one, Grant by Ron Chernow. You talk about what informs my work here in Congress. I think it's vitally important to understand our nation's history, to understand both the victories and the challenges that we have faced in the past so that we can make better informed decisions now. And I love, as a military guy, I love looking back at conflict and what led us into those conflicts and how we came out of those conflicts a stronger nation. Grant is certainly one of those books. As I read and learned the role that my great state of Ohio played in the Civil War and holding our Union together. Lincoln had 3 prominent Ohioans that encircled him. Salmon Chase, who was his Secretary of Treasury, had been the 23rd governor of Ohio. Of course, Grant became his fighting general. Sherman, from just a little bit outside of Columbus, Ohio, became one of Grant's right-hand guys, and Sheridan, also from just outside of Columbus, General Sheridan, another right-hand general that played such a prominent role in bringing a decisive conclusion to the Civil War and avoiding any more bloodshed than we had. So I've enjoyed reading that book. I just finished reading 13 Days by Robert F. Kennedy, looking at the Cuban Missile Crisis. I was reminded, I was born, I don't think any of you were, but I was born during that age, and I remember the national tension around the Cuban Missile Crisis. And I think most Americans do not really have an appreciation for how close we came to a nuclear holocaust between the 2 great superpowers at that time, the Soviet Union and the United States. And had it not been for John F. Kennedy's digging deep, looking at alternatives, looking at other options other than the obvious, who knows where we would have been as a nation. And I think we owe President Kennedy and his brother Robert a great debt of gratitude for having handled that situation the way that they did. I'm also reading Pioneers, the greatest or the latest by David McCullough. My little community where I live, Marietta, Ohio, is the first settlement in the Northwest Territory, and that entire book is about the move west after the Civil War, in how we wound up in Ohio. And so it is a great book. It's interesting to look at the maps that are in his book and see the very street that I live on today and what it might have looked like back in those early days. 1787 was a long time ago when Ohio was when Marietta was populated. So big deal for that book. I'm reading a couple of faith-based books too. A book called Peace with God, which is Billy Graham's book. He wrote it back in the 50s. It's had a couple of additions to it. And so I'm reading that, and also a book by Pastor Tony Evans. He's the chaplain for the Dallas Mavericks, was the chaplain for the Dallas Cowboys. Pastors a big church in Dallas, Texas. It's called America, Turning a Nation to God. And I tell you, from Washington to Lincoln to John F. Kennedy, Reagan, and I think our current president, they all acknowledged the role that faith played in their decision making. There have been times in our nation's history when we needed to be on our knees. Lincoln talked about it. He said, "I'm so oftentimes driven to my knees because I'm overwhelmed by the fact that I have nowhere else to turn." I think we've got some issues in our country today that are going to need divine intervention, and I think we'd be wise to listen to that counsel. So I'm reading those books too.
Watch the responses of other members of Congress by searching "What Are You Reading?" at booktv.org.